We are back, and we are joined now by Spencer Headworth, Associate Professor of Sociology at Purdue University, author of Rules of the Road, the Automobile and the Transformation of American Criminal Justice. Spencer, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
So, yes, good to have you. Your book focuses on how the car completely transformed policing in this country. We've had guests like, Paris Marx on and others to speak about how the car has transformed, urban spaces, transformed the way that we structure our society physically. But I never thought about it really in the context of policing and criminal justice. I guess let's just start there from with the overall thesis and findings of the book.
Sure. Yeah. The overall idea of the book is that to understand the development of American criminal justice over the 20th and the 21st centuries, we really need to reckon with the pivotal role that cars and driving have played in a number of key developments. The origination of the idea of police as these generalists that were going to have wide authority and wide discretion really hinged on the assignment of traffic duty to police in the early 20th century. There could have been a different direction taken there, but the direction that was taken was that we're going to put this on the plate of police, and that has really largely created many of the aspects of modern policing that we recognize today. And then moving forward through the 20th century, key developments in the Fourth Amendment and search and seizure hinge on the role of cars and driving and vehicle stops. Vehicle stops quickly become the predominant way that Americans directly interact with law enforcement officers. That's the most common way that we interact with police. And then moving, into more recent years, key developments in surveillance technology, location tracking, automated license plate readers. All these types of things reflect the sort of ongoing adjustment of the criminal law and criminal law enforcement to developments resulting from the capacity for travel that automobiles enable.
Yeah, I mean, so let's start there when the explosion of the car happened at the start of the 20th century, and I didn't realize how bloody this situation was, like just Americans getting killed on the streets all the time because there were cars that were getting sold, people were buying them, maybe you didn't know how to drive them fully, and also our streets were just not equipped to handle it at that point. Take us to that point in history, and how that began to shape what you're discussing here.
Sure. Yeah. So as in lots of situations, the law and law enforcement institutions are really playing catch up to the development of this new technology, which diffused rapidly across the country. And as you indicate, urban infrastructure was simply not equipped to handle cars. Many people who were operating them didn't really know what they were doing. There was, at first, of course, no official licensure, no driving examination required. It was really a free-for-all. And yeah, it was carnage to a large extent on especially urban streets in cities throughout the country as cars rapidly proliferate. And one of the statistics that I cite in the book is during the year and a half or so that the United States was involved in World War I, more people died from car collisions in the United States than died fighting overseas.
Wow.
So this created a real need for a response, and the law enforcement, police departments in various cities did their best, I think, to adapt to the situation. And the legal changes that we see emerging from this time period include things like the creation of jaywalking as a crime, and within a decade or so, we moved from a situation in which the street was much more of a multi-use space, right? At the turn of the 20th century, you would have horse-drawn vehicles and pedestrians and people selling things in the street, children playing in the street. And within about a decade, 15, 20 years certainly, the street had been legally and socially redefined as a space for automobiles only.
Yeah, I mean, the crime of jaywalking? I can you talk a bit about how the car manufacturers had a role in the creation of that designation and making that illegal?
Sure. So J, for those who aren't aware, I wasn't before I started doing the research for this book. J was a slur. It meant like an uneducated or unsophisticated person from a rural area. So the creation of this crime of jaywalking, it was a propaganda effort on the part of automobile manufacturers and organizations for motorists like the American Automobile Association to sort of redefine the idea of crossing the street outside of a designated crosswalk or crossing the street not at right angles, or to redefine that socially as the act of an unsophisticated person who had no business being in the city, right? So you get this, sort of social disparaging aspect that then is quickly formally adopted into the law.
With some
And
backlash too, or with some debate. I mean, I didn't realize that it was considered offensive by certain people when they were debating the adoption of jaywalking laws, but now it's just everywhere.
certainly, right? So we see this, throughout different things when we get changes in the law that what was originally contentious and considered objectionable by many people very quickly came to be just taken for granted, right? That's just the way it is. Of course, it only makes sense to cross at designated crosswalks and so forth. And one of the things I note in the book is like a lot of aspects of the car-centric policing and criminal punishment system, there are major racial disparities in jaywalking now, with African Americans much more likely to be arrested and cited for jaywalking relative to their overall proportion of the population.
Gotcha. And another thing I didn't think about is how prohibition contributed to this as well. You write about that in, I think, your third chapter. How did prohibition ramp up this policing becoming indelibly linked to the car, both in the crimes that they're targeting and in the fact that soon enough police forces were highly motorized?
Sure. So prior to prohibition, there were some laws on the books outlawing certain substances and so on and so forth. But the arrival of prohibition marked the first time in U.S. history when law enforcement was engaged in a concerted, systematic effort of searching for contraband. This was the first time that the type of activity that seems very familiar to us now was really becoming a major part of the law enforcement enterprise. And the business of bootlegging and rum running and moonshining and all of those, fun terms that we associate with the period of prohibition ran through automobiles, right? That was how the illegal alcohol was being transported for retail sale and so on and so forth. And so police around the country, federal law enforcement and state and local law enforcement operating under color of federal law, found themselves wanting to search all these vehicles. So one of the major legal and social consequences of prohibition when it comes to this interaction between cars and criminal justice is a 1925 decision called Carroll versus United States that was about warrant requirements for searches. And that decision established what we now know as the quote unquote automobile exception to search warrant requirements. So at that time, William Howard Taft was Chief Justice of the United States, and he wrote the majority opinion for the court in Carroll, and they reasoned that a law enforcement officer wishing to search a vehicle did not have time to go out and get a warrant because the vehicle could be relocated, right, by the time that warrant would be obtained. Therefore, the court reasoned law enforcement needed to be empowered to make discretionary decisions about when to search. When a search was legally justified and reasonable under the Fourth Amendment. And that's where the probable cause standard in Fourth Amendment jurisprudence really comes into play, where in the Carroll decision, which is still good law for all intents and purposes, in the Carroll decision, the court held that an officer could make a determination of whether there was probable cause to believe that there was evidence of a crime currently occurring or having recently occurred in the vehicle. And if the officer made the determination that there was probable cause to believe that, then that officer was justified to conduct a full inspection of the interior of the vehicle and its occupants without the requirement of obtaining a search warrant. And that is a pivotal Fourth Amendment decision that really sets up a lot of subsequent Fourth Amendment jurisprudence.
Certainly, and then the weakening of the Fourth Amendment is indelibly linked to both, I would say, prohibition and then the subsequent war on drugs, where there's another loosening of those kinds of requirements. Like if a dog, I remember learning about this case in college, if a drug dog goes to the door of a home and they smell something, what does that mean? Does that constitute a search? Things of that nature, and the fact that it didn't always need to be this way. Like we could live in a country where you could get pulled over, I guess, for a traffic stop, but that if the officer said they smelled weed on you or something, there was another reality in which that officer would have to obtain a warrant before they searched the car. But that's not how things went down. And the context of prohibition is so important there because you can see how criminalizing certain substances gives police more powers because of the, I guess, stated urgency of stopping the crime in those instances.
Yep, and as you suggest, and as I point out in the book, prohibition really is a precursor to the war on drugs in many ways, not least of which is the effect that it had on criminal organization. Prohibition functionally created the 20th century mafia in the United States as we know it by creating this huge black market for something for which there was a lot of demand. And there are strong parallels to the country's and the world's experience with the war on drugs and the effect that the robust black market for what are now illegal drugs has had on creating a massive profit stream for criminal organizations.